Hello, my name is Dr. Jeff Harris. I'm a psychologist in New Mexico in the southwestern part of the United States. This video is for Key Strategies Training Lesson 7, using behavioral strategies to change actions. So hopefully before you watch this video, you've watched Lesson 6, was exploring actions, and hopefully seen the demonstration of lesson 6. The behavioral strategies were originally written by Elizabeth Campbell, a colleague of mine at Texas Women's University several years ago. So thanks to Bethy for writing these original slides. So as we said in the last video, the last lesson, behavioral activation is a behavioral approach based on operant conditioning. And it was originally published by Christopher Martel, Sona Demijan, and Ruth Herman Dunn in 2010. This is the first edition. There's a second edition out that's more recent than the original 2010 version. So last week we talked about exploring behaviors. This week we're going to be talking about changing behaviors. And so Martel and his colleagues said, we encourage an experimental approach that focuses on trying a behavior and observing the outcome. So it's operant conditioning. There's going to be behavior, and it's going to result in consequences like reinforcement or punishment. And we want to look at what happens with new behaviors. So we're going to be talking I'm going to be introducing 4 strategies today. Behavioral strategy 5, experimenting with new actions. Behavioral strategy 6, improving skills. Strategy 7, generalizing effective actions. And strategy 8, assessing behavioral change and impact. So behavioral strategy 5 is experimenting with new actions and observing results. So the strategy marker here is that once the therapist and client have a clear understanding of client's behaviors, their triggers, their consequences, their function, they can now focus on experimenting with new behaviors. So Martel and his colleagues said, we encourage an experimental approach that focuses on trying a behavior and observing the outcome. Experiments are based on functional analyses of past behavior and hypotheses regarding potentially reinforcing activities for each client. So when you're identifying new actions, you're going to hypothesize which of them are going to result in a better mood or less anxiety or movement toward your goals. So to facilitate experimenting with new actions, the therapist may focus first on actions that the client is readily willing and able to change and will quickly ease distress. The therapist may begin this process by asking, if you were already feeling better, what might you be doing differently? And so the answer might be, well, if I were feeling better, I might go for a walk. Okay, well, I'm going to ask you to go for a walk to see if that improves your mood. And we're going to hypothesize what's going to happen, and then we're going to observe the results. So an experimental method. So here's an example. I'm tired of feeling down. I just want to be happier and feel better. And the client asks, and if you were feeling better, what might you be doing differently? These may be important behaviors for us to target. So all of this is looking at specific actions that the client can take that will change their mood, change their anxiety, change their responses. So the next behavioral strategy 6, is improving skills through training and behavioral rehearsal. So the marker here is that when potential actions seem difficult to implement, it may be helpful for the therapist to help the client improve skills by providing training and practicing new skills within psychotherapy. So the training is showing a client something that they can do differently, and practicing is the client doing the behavior with encouragement, with refinement, with coaching from the therapist. So the context here is that clients also should not be expected to simply rely on willpower to engage in an agreed upon assignment. The therapist should take time to discuss a plan of implementation with the client. The more specific and detailed, the better. So as you're improving skills, you want to go into a lot of detail, and that in-session practice is going to be helpful. To maximize the usefulness of this strategy, the therapist should make certain that agreed upon assignments continue to be realistic and understandable. The therapist can reflect on the following question: does this assignment give us both enough information so that the agreements we are making are clear? So the consequences that, if used effectively, training and behavioral rehearsal are expected to result in a wider repertoire of effective actions that result in positive reinforcement. So I want to highlight a couple of the words in that. So a wider repertoire of effective actions. So if you have 5 things that might improve your mood or lower your anxiety rather than just one, that's going to be more helpful. And so that's what they mean by a wider repertoire of effective action. So if this doesn't work, what do you want to do next? If this doesn't work, what do you want to do? Of these options, what do you want to try? And then the point here in behavioral activation is to have behaviors that result in positive reinforcement. So if I go for a walk, I'll feel better. If I call my friends, I'll feel less anxious. If I write down my feelings, I won't feel as overwhelmed. If I and so forth. So that's important to think about: a wider repertoire and positive reinforcement. So here's an example. I felt better at first when I went for a walk. Later that day, I felt very lonely. I'd like to invite a friend to walk with me, but I'm afraid I might sound needy. Counselor says, let's talk about some different ways to ask a friend to walk with you, and then practice an invitation that doesn't sound needy. So we're improving their skills because the client wants to reach out to people, but is afraid of how they'll be perceived. And so practicing and improving skills in session is going to be useful so that the client is more likely to engage in the behavior because they're less concerned about the negative impact of sounding needy. Okay, so now so after we've done some practice and training and skills rehearsal, behavioral rehearsal in session, the next strategy is generalizing effective actions to new environments outside of psychotherapy. So the mark here is that as clients learn to schedule and structure effective activities in session, it may be helpful for the therapist to begin to teach them how to do so on their own outside of sessions. So the context here is that instilling the ability to transfer what's been learned in one context to another is a critical component. It enables clients to respond effectively when presented with new situations. So here's a suggestion. In order to help clients generalize effective actions, the therapist may teach clients to structure and schedule activities that follow a plan, not a mood. The therapist may explain to clients the benefit of an outside-in approach. Engage in a pleasurable activity and positive feelings will follow. So let me highlight some of that. So follow a plan, not a mood. Lots of people say, oh, I need to apply for a new job, but I don't feel like it today. I'll do it tomorrow when I feel like it. Or I'm not gonna do the dishes today because I don't feel like it. I'll do it tomorrow if I feel like it. So that's following a mood, not a plan. Behavioral activation teaches clients to follow a plan and not a mood. And it's an outside in. And so I'm going to do what's good on the outside. I'm going to apply for a job. I'm going to wash the dishes that have been piling up in the kitchen, and then see what happens. So I'm going to push through the avoidance, and then I'm going to feel that pride of accomplishment and observe the results. The consequence is that when a psychotherapist works with a client to generalize effective actions, the expected consequence is a more general pattern of proactive behavior that results in positive reinforcement. When clients learn to activate their own behavior and identify situations that will result in reinforcement, they're more likely to maintain positive gains on their own. So here's an example of generalizing effective actions. I made some important change. The client says, I've made some important changes in my life recently. Things were bad for a while, but I got myself moving and I'm starting to feel better. The counselor says, good. One of the ways we can learn from your experience is to identify specific ways that your mood might be vulnerable in the future and what you can do about it. Do you want to make a list of these? Maybe you can write them down. So if someone says, oh, I always get off track when I don't get up in the morning, and so sleep may be identified as an important issue, and so getting off the computer, getting off the video games at a certain time may be an important way to make sure that you engage in the behavior of getting a good night's sleep. So the final behavioral strategy is assessing behavioral change, looking at multidimensional impact, and considering a shift in focus. So once behavioral activation has taken place, it may be important to measure the impact of change to a client's actions, thoughts, and feelings, thereby signifying whether further therapy or shift in therapeutic focus is required. So from a unified perspective, from a multi-theoretical perspective, behavioral activation is one option. Focusing on actions is one option, but focusing on thoughts and feelings is our other options. And so that's why our little picture here at the bottom of the slide has our white human looking at 3 different doors. So the 3 doors represent a behavioral approach, a cognitive approach, or an emotion-focused approach. The context here is that Martel describes this process as troubleshooting and explains that troubleshooting helps to make the best use of any client efforts aimed at activation and keeps therapy moving in the direction of the client's goals. So here's a suggestion. When therapists determine that a client has either made significant gains or is unable to make further progress by focusing on actions, it may be helpful to discuss a shift in focus to thoughts or feelings. The therapist may begin by explaining the potential benefits of shifting focus and presenting cognitive or emotion-focused strategies to the client. So the consequences, it's predicted that clients who are finished with behavioral activation sessions but not ready for termination may benefit from additional work focusing on thoughts or feelings. So here's an example of behavioral strategy 8, assessing change and impact. The client says, therapy has been helpful. I'm more active, but still think people don't like me. And the counselor says, now that you've made some changes in your actions, it may be helpful to switch our focus to thoughts. And this is kind of suggesting a sequential approach that you start with actions if that's where the client decides to act, and then you might move to feelings or thoughts next. The other option is a more interactive approach where you're looking at all 3 of those together. And when we talk in lesson 8 about treatment planning and doing a multidimensional survey, we'll talk a little bit more about a sequential approach versus an interactive approach. So those are the 4 strategies for behavioral change that are used in key strategies training. So these are the ones that we just looked at. So in review, we looked at strategy 5, experimenting with new actions, where we identify behaviors that a client is going to try. Behavioral strategy 6, which is improving skills. So that's the training and the behavioral rehearsal that happens inside psychotherapy with the help and support and coaching of the therapist. Behavioral strategy 7, generalizing effective actions. So taking things that the client has learned inside psychotherapy and applying them in real life. And then the last and 8th strategy is assessing behavioral change and impact and seeing if we might need to shift to focus toward thoughts or feelings. So I hope that the next video you watch will be the demonstration video for behavioral change, and we'll you'll get to see me trying to put some of these change strategies in practice with my the client Raju, who's my demonstration client. So I hope you could watch that video next. Thanks.